Welcome. Thank you for attending today's webinar hosted by the Organization Development and Change and Workforce Education and Development Program at Penn State. Today, we have the great pleasure of welcoming our presenter, Dr. Sue Cromwell. My name is Jenny Lee, and I'm a Ph.D. candidate in Workforce Education and Development Program. We also have Segun Giri with us today, who will be managing chat feature and Q&A session. In terms of the interactive format for this webinar, please open the chat feature in the Zoom platform to interact. If you have any questions about the presentation, please use Q&A feature on Zoom. You can see the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Click the Q&A button and write your questions. The Q&A session will be at the end of the presentation. Our online Master of Professional Studies in Organization Development and Change can help you prepare to implement quality and continuous improvement initiatives in an organization. Furthermore, there is a Ph.D. program in Workforce Education and Development with a concentration in Human Resource Development and Organization Development. Our program has created a continuous monthly webinar series with experts around the world. Today, we welcome Dr. Sue Cromwell. Dr. Sue Cromwell currently serves as the Senior Director of Organizational Change Management for Penn State's Finance and Business Division. The office is responsible for leading change management and organizational excellence efforts within the division. She received her Ph.D. from the Penn State University in Workforce Education and Development, and as a champion of change and people, Dr. Cromwell has focused her career on helping people and organizations. As an educator, trainer, consultant, she has gained experience and wisdom not only from her work, but more importantly, from the people and organizations she serves. Here's Dr. Cromwell.
Well, hi, everyone. Thank you, Jenny. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Happy Friday. And thank you to Jenny and Sangwon for helping today in this webinar. They did a lot of work behind the scenes to help us get ready. So as I planned for today's presentation, I really approached this presentation as a practitioner. And what would be helpful information to share with this audience? I wanted to share the journey that resulted in a very positive outcome. And I do hope that you gain some insights from the journey. First, I will talk a little bit about the theory behind the effort. And the reason I want to talk about that is because that was really the first part of our journey, is having those conversations to understand each of the disciplines that we were coming from. And really, it helped the collaboration be successful so that we were able to get the synergy that we needed in this space. Second, I'll show how we work together and some examples of tools that we used as keys to success. And then last, I'll be adding the key lessons we learned, as well as asking you to think about how you might benefit from this type of partnership. So let's begin. So it's important to understand, as I said, a little bit about the theory behind project management and organizational change management. Certainly, I'm not the project management expert. I think Dr. Donahue has a little bit more expertise than I in this area. But when the project manager and I began to enter this partnership, we realized that we needed to understand a little bit more about the disciplines where we were coming from. So we took some time in one of our introductory meetings to both gain an understanding about the world each other was living in. In many cases, I find myself working with a wide range of project managers, some who have been around a while and are very seasoned, and some are fairly new in the field. So for me, I took the opportunity to learn as much as I could about project management. I've never sat for an exam, but I have taken courses in it. And I wanted to understand my new partner's world. He also felt that since change management was new to him in the sense that he's never had a group to turn to focus on the people side of change, that he wanted to focus, he felt it was beneficial to him to take the time to learn also. So, in a sense, we both wanted to begin to build competence in this area. So, as I said, I'm not the project management expert, and I believe there's an upcoming webinar that will certainly go into more detail. But I'll share a little bit about what we shared with each other. And it's going to be very high level, but that was the extent that we talked about. So my project management partner started, and he explained that with any discipline, there's a journey or an evolution that takes place. For project management, which has certainly been around for a long time, and probably a little bit more informally since the beginning of time, there's been a dedicated effort, standards, processes, and certification in that project managers have been utilizing for a period of time. He also explained that there is a shift from what they call traditional project management to what they call project management 2.0, which is also built on a lot of history and good long-standing practices. So he explained, and I thought this chart laid it out, this was one of the charts that he shared with me, was that, traditional project management, and many of the seasoned project managers, have been schooled in a more traditional approach, which was much, which he described as a little bit more restrictive, more structured, and worked very well, had a lot more structure to it, the way information was shared, how projects were managed, was a little bit more restrictive in terms of the control of the project. And how he described it is that as Web 2.0 technologies became more prominent, the abilities for teams to collaborate, the introduction of agile practices, traditional project management has evolved into what they're now calling project management 2.0. Which allows for a much more collaborative or flexible approach. And one of the key points he shared was that in this discussion was that, in the past, the three areas that are in the light blue, the only areas that were really measured in this traditional approach were typically time, cost, and scope. And what they found was in many cases that, and what many project manager practitioners were finding, is that a significant number of projects fail because of some of the items that are in dark blue. A project could have been delivered on time, on budget, but end users impacted by this new technology or practices did not adopt well. And so the project overall was deemed a failure. The intended value was never fully realized. And as Project 2.0 emerged, the importance of all these additional areas to truly, add value or business value became critical elements as the focus shifted now to business value in a much more holistic sense. So, he shared Project Management Institute and some standards in the PMBOK knowledge, PMBOK, and the definitions have even evolved in each of these spaces, as you can see in the blue, to really focus on business value as we move forward. So instead of just the triple constraints of time, cost, and scope, now we're focusing on achieving the desired business value in these projects. And this is just an example from PMBOK. This is the newest version, some information from the newest version that I believe is coming out in May 2021. But again, you'll start to see in that new version that's going to be released this May, in general, they have more shift towards business value and collaboration. So as we started to talk about this, and I was learning about this, he kind of said, is this the new project lifecycle, Sue? So, we have obviously the tenets of project management, but, let's start to think about it in our worlds, in our projects as we collaborate together, this idea of value determination. What are the benefits? What's the value analysis that we can bring to this project? And so again, as we talked, he said, Sue, I'm been around for a while in project management. I've never had an OCM person that's been able to focus specifically on the people side of change. So he said, I really would like to hear your side of the story, and how you can come help rescue to make sure that we have a successful outcome. So next step was for me to share a little bit about, the evolution of organizational change management. Again, very high level, but I shared a little bit of information from an OCM perspective. And I said, as project management evolved, so did organizational change management. The difference in OCM is that OCM as a standalone practice is a little bit more recent in its evolution, as the first generation of OCM began to evolve in the 1990s. While we had some initial change theories that evolved in the early 1900s, and in the 40s and 60s models of change, like Lewin's unfreeze change and unfreezing, or sometimes they call it the ice cube model. A lot of that was focused on the psychology of change. But over time, I think what you've seen and probably have heard in maybe some of your classes as you've been involved in the program, for those of you that have been, over time, more robust change models, theories began to evolve. You started to see degrees, certifications, and frameworks, and research continued to advance. More specific change methodologies have gotten more numerous. And similar, what has happened in the project management space, began to start to happen in the change management space. And as many of you know, Penn State now offers a degree in organizational development and change. So this is an example, and as I shared with him, I said, over time, there's been a proliferation of change management theories. This was a great example I shared with him of a framework that was developed by Gabrielle O'Donovan to kind of try to help organize change theories on 3 levels: the individual level, the team level, and the organization level. In this model, she also broke them down into 28 subcategories, and within each are more theories and tools within each one. So as I explained to him, the lightly shaded areas are ones that are kind of the non-human elements of change. So things like the nature of change, the actual change process, they're more the non-human elements of change. And the ones that are in the blue, the shaded, more darker elements, are really related to the human elements of change. So for example, for the nature of change, the question that's asked oftentimes is, what is the change and what purpose does it serve the organization? Versus in number 15, when we start to see change impacts in that subcategory, we start to really focus on who does the change impact and how great is that impact on individuals or end users. And then to take it a step further, I explained that, just in that subcategory, the complexity of theories just in the change process continue to evolve. Here's here's 6 examples of change processes that have been introduced over time. And it makes it a little bit more complex. The project manager I was talking to was familiar with, maybe 1 or 2 of these theories, over time that he had heard about, but, didn't realize that there were so many theories. So, you've got Lewin's change model, you got McKinsey's model here, you have Cotter's 8-step change model over here, you have ProSci's ADKAR model in the center, you've got Bridges' change model here. And then, there's even a book called Nudge that describes another process or another perspective on change. So if we compare the 2 disciplines, this slide illustrates that you'll see in the blue, that is the kind of maturity of project management. And as I said, in terms of as an academic discipline, the practitioner skill sets that are available as a profession with professional organizations and things like that. And then, just the kind of products that are available to consumers around this space. That's where you'll start to see, some of the differences in the theory. In the red, that's change management, and that's where we start to see some of the differences. This was done in 2018 based on research that was done, and I'm sure that you'll start to see change management as things evolve, catch up, more certifications, more programs, more products available, in the space. And then finally, we started to talk about, this is a great slide from ProSci that I really thought, kind of shows how the disciplines are merging and where there's great opportunity here. So this is a model, like I said, from ProSci, and it shows, from a project management standpoint, in the center, you start to see that transition of change here. So this is the process of moving from current state to future state. Whether it's a technology project, non-technology project, and the project management focus is really on the technical side. They have a process that they use, they have tools that they use in that space. And as change management also, this is just illustrating the ProSci technology, but change management focuses on the people side of change, helping to move the people from current state to future state. There are processes that are used. As I said, there's multiple different kinds of change processes. This just shows the ProSci process. And there's also a number of tools that are available that, as the change methodology, there's a number of tools that we use to navigate through that. So as we started to leverage this, and we use this to oftentimes talk about, we actually started to talk about this in terms of, when we started to talk to leaders, when we started to introduce this and started to just build awareness about how this collaboration may work, this was helpful to be able to show how our partnership, how this collaboration would work and what each of us would be focusing on. And so, really the power of the collaboration, the benefit of the collaboration was really how together, how we would focus on the business value as we merge these two disciplines on this project. And so, it was really, really important for us to take the time, especially if we have, if the two of us had not been, that familiar with what roles or what our disciplines were about. It was really important to us to think about how we would, how we might work together. I think there's a hand raised, Sengwa. Okay, we'll talk a lot about the questions, I guess, at the end, is what my understanding is at this point in time. So we will capture those. So that leads us into the next part of the presentation. So how do we put this into practice? So we learned, and again, it didn't take us, we didn't spend weeks and weeks and weeks educating each other. So it wasn't like participating in a course. It was really just trying to think about, giving each other a little bit of an idea of what worlds we were coming to, and then how we might approach this and work together. So the next step was really, after our introductory meetings, was, starting to say, all right, how do we put all this into practice? We did want to have a traditional project plan, so we needed to have milestones and deliverables, but we also made sure that we worked together to have a successful outcome. So this was our challenge. And I wanted to share, again, from a practitioner, a little bit about our journey, the project that we collaborated on, areas where we worked together. But there was a project that we were asked to collaborate on. And that really prompted the formation of our team. Before our involvement in this project, the project was being managed internally and had not been moving along with the progress that was needed. The person that was our change, the leader, the sponsor of this change, was trying to move this forward, was very busy. And many times we do find that. We find that managers, change leaders, vice presidents, whoever it may be, just are so busy, they don't have the time to try to do the project management piece of a project. And so in addition, this project, there was already some significant resistance with some of the stakeholders, with some of the end users that were going to be impacted by this change. And so one of the things that we found is that there had to be some dedicated resources to support this, this leader, to try to help make sure that this project moved forward. So it was about a 1-year project. We had some very specific timelines that were needed. It was behind, a little bit behind when we got onto the project for the reasons I just mentioned. And so we really were charged with how to keep this project moving. So it was included a divisional transformation. There was some organizational redesign in this project. There were technology projects that were included and on the horizon. Our office had just launched, so people weren't sure what organizational change management was about. There was a vision, a strong vision of our leaders, though, to connect these two resources together, project management and organization change management. But our biggest challenge was, as I said, for the project manager, myself, is, all right, how do we merge these two disciplines? How do we work together effectively? And how do we make this, this real? So part of our journey. So these are some real key steps that we took as we were working through this process. So outside of the normal project work, we had project timelines, milestones. Again, we had a project plan that was important. So one of the first things that we did is we wanted to make sure that we were looking and engaging both project management methodology and OCM methodology as we were laying out the project plan. So several areas that, I said I wanted to call out is the first thing that we did was we met with leadership. We met with our sponsors, we met with teams, we met with stakeholders. We really needed to understand what the current state was. We asked them to be very transparent. So we did have focus groups, not only at the beginning, but throughout the project. We also wanted to understand the desired future state. So where were we going? And kind of understanding the path that we needed to do to get there. One of the things that I find, oftentimes in a project, especially when we start to pull groups together, is that, and as we are working on the project charter, is that oftentimes we have a pretty clear picture in most cases of what the current state is. But when we start to talk about the desired future state, what the changes are going to be, we find that not everybody is on the same page. So making sure that we had those discussions early on was very important. Making sure that we were spending the time to listen, to understand what the current state was, because we didn't want any surprises either as we were moving forward in this project. That's the other reason we wanted them to be transparent. The second piece was that we asked a lot of questions. Especially in the beginning of the project. So we asked a lot of questions, both of ourselves. So the project manager and I, in our briefings, we asked a lot of questions to say, is this working well? Is this not working well? Are there better ways to approach this? If we found something wasn't working well, we always focused on what was the solution. We wanted to make sure that we were thinking about, the what ifs that the other might not. We also wanted to make sure that, are there better ways to approach things? We wanted to, if something wasn't clear when we were meeting with the leadership team or our sponsors, we wanted to make sure that we asked a lot of questions so we understood. We were dealing with busy people. And so sometimes to get them to focus and make sure that, what they're thinking is what we understand is clear, we want to make sure that we're asking those questions. The third thing that we found was, in the beginning, it was the project manager and I. So as we moved along in the project and, we started to unravel this puzzle, or some people say, as we start to peel back the onion, we want to make sure that there are points in the project where we didn't have the expertise or the knowledge to do what needed to be done. So we had to step back and reach out and engage or bring other members on the team or engage other team members to help us. So one example that we found was, there was some analysis and requirements gathering that needed to happen. In the beginning, we didn't have that on our radar, but we realized that it needed to be done. So we needed to involve a business analyst, bring that business analyst on the team to help us. Also, as the technology projects rolled out, we needed to involve technology team members. So they who were working in the division, we needed to bring them on as part of the process. We also realized that, as we started to roll out and think about the communication plan, that we need to engage some communication experts on the group, as well as making sure, as I said, the leadership team. One thing that was apparent, we didn't have all the answers. And so, we had to make sure that we were engaging other team members as needed. I can't stress enough how important it was that the project manager and I continued to work together for better project success. And so we met, probably almost daily, but, we had regular meetings on a weekly basis to continue to go through, do all the things that I said, ask questions, think about, where we were there any gaps, what we needed to make, what we needed to add, tweak. We reviewed the project plan to make sure that, were there any tweaks to that plan? So, that was something that, again, that was really important as part of this collaboration. So it wasn't just one of us going off, it was both of us as a team leading this effort together. But one area that was really important and I wanted to share were some of the tools and templates. And we wanted to make sure that we wanted to spend some time looking at the tools and templates from each of our disciplines and where could we find common ground. And so, project management had toolkits, as you saw in that earlier slide. OCM, we have toolkits and templates that we use. And some of them we needed to merge. We needed to try to pull those together, take some of the tools from project management and then incorporate some change management components. We also wanted to look at the change management toolkit and were there areas that we could incorporate project management components. So I thought as part of this, I would just show you some of the examples of the tools that we felt were very helpful to us, so you can get a better sense of how we shared them. So this is an example. I pulled 6 of the tools or 6 of the processes that we shared. A charter, I have an example of that to show you, and I'll talk a little bit about that. A stakeholder analysis is always a deliverable, but in the project management space, it wasn't as evolved. So wanted to make sure that we would look at that and say, in change management, we do a very detailed stakeholder analysis. So, how do we share that? A communication plan, how do we build that out? We work together to create a status dashboard that I'll show you. One thing that was important throughout, as I said early on when we were asking questions and meeting with all those different groups, but we wanted to make sure that focus groups not only included updates on the progress of the project, and then getting input and feedback from our focus groups on gathering requirements, things like that, but we also wanted to use those focus groups to assess readiness. So are we getting resistance? How ready are people? How aware are they? Are we informing them? Are we communicating with them enough? And then last but not least was a project closure report that our project manager actually, kind of led the effort on, but it was really helpful as we found that that was something that was really important from a business value perspective and how we would present that to our sponsors. So let me just go through kind of each one of the tools. So this is an example of the charter. This is just a snapshot. The charter is about probably 2 pages long. And so some of the things that we started out has traditional things in it, like, the project name. We wanted to make sure we captured roles and responsibilities and who the team members are. What are some of our key milestones, timelines, target completion date, who we included then on the charter. Again, I think I mentioned the project manager had a project charter. I have a change management charter. And this is one area that we felt we wanted to be efficient instead of duplicating efforts, instead of taking the teams through 2 charters. We wanted to streamline this process. So we built this one combined project charter and included the change components. So we also list who our sponsors are, who the leader of the change is. So we have that contact. If there's a change manager, somebody that's kind of working with us on the day-to-day, we wanted to make sure. We wanted to make sure that we had the problem statement clearly articulated, a description of what is the proposed solution, what is the impact of success, meaning if the change initiative is successful, what's the impact of that on the organization? What are some of the consequences of not changing? So we wanted to make sure that was clear. So, what if we don't change? What are some of the consequences if this isn't enacted? What was in scope and out of scope? That's very important, both on a project side, but also from a change side. And I'll tell you a little bit of why that's important to us from a change side. We also added to it, we had project goals. We also included in this charter key performance indicators. We also listed any assumptions or risks that were important because that's important. And then also we had a sign off for the sponsor or sponsors to sign off of it so that we were all on the same page. But as I said, one of the things that's important with this charter as we went through the charter process, it also lays the basis for any of our communication messages. We could go back to the charter, look at the information in the charter, and refer to that. So as we were developing frequently asked questions, or we were developing, kind of talking points about why this change was necessary, what was happening in the change, we oftentimes use the charter to flush out those key messages. The other things is that when we had those early discussions as we were developing the charter with the leadership team, just talking about, kind of what's changing, what is the problem, what's the solution, what's the impact of success. We oftentimes found that not everybody in the beginning was thinking the same way. And so by facilitating those discussions, it really helped to coalesce the group and help them get on the same page. So charter, very important. We combined them, took the project management elements, the change management elements, and put them together. So it was very helpful to us, as a working document that we used all the way through the project and could refer back to. Second thing that we did was look at our stakeholder analysis. As I said, there was a stakeholder analysis that was, leveraged in the project management side. We add a little bit more detail on the change management side. There's a little bit more information that we want to capture. And so we pulled this, we leveraged this, we pulled it together. One thing that I really think is important on the change management side is to really understand the impacts, any impacts on end users and the population. So as we did this stakeholder analysis, we were talking about for this particular project, not only internal impacts, but are there external impacts? Are there vendors that you, on the outside of the organization that you might, that typically contact you? And, as you think about the changes that are going to be happening, are they going to be impacted in some way, shape, or form? So we really wanted to understand that. And this stakeholder analysis is a document that we utilize, again, throughout the entire project. We update it, we review it to see if our initial assumptions are accurate or if they're not accurate as we go through. So very detailed, but one of the first things that we do after the charter. We then, from that, from completing the stakeholder analysis, it helps us to develop a communication plan. So this is a very basic plan that we use. Our focus here was on how do we socialize this effort. So we needed to develop that. What kind of tools, what kind of messages, what's the timing, what's our delivery approach, who's going to be responsible for that communication, who's going to be responsible for delivering that communication, and then how are we going to capture feedback once that communication goes out. Once we developed this plan, we then embedded and mapped out those milestones into the project plan. So we had an initial project plan that was focused more on, like I said, the technical side of the change. And then once we completed this early on, we were then able to embed that into the project plan. So we also had OCM milestones in that plan. One of the things in any of our tools that, the project manager and I decided that they're flexible, they can be expanded, they can be adjusted as needed as we're moving through and learning through this collaboration together. Another useful piece that we developed together was a dashboard. One of the things that, we have very busy sponsors, leadership team members, very busy people. So we had to find a way to kind of give them a succinct way to report on the project. We met with them weekly. So we had to make sure that in that meeting, we wanted to give them that update, but also be able to do it in a way that was very easy for them to look at, capture, and then move forward. So we had this project milestone. We had this dashboard. So we had the milestones from the project plan. We also had then the status mapped out for each one of those. So what was, complete, what was in progress. We had that little red light, green light, yellow light, kind of model there. So somebody could look at that and say, oh, this is in red. Let's talk about them. Things that are in green, we don't need to talk about those anymore. We also added the key performance indicators at the time. So we wanted to make sure that the key performance indicators, the measures in terms of measuring progress, project success, were visible. And then again, we also had a status bar on those so they could be easily seen. And then any comments that were part of that process. We also talked about risks. So we wanted to make sure that any risks that were in process in the related to the execution of the project. So let's say that something, was brought up as a risk as we were moving forward in the project. That was part of our discussion so that we could talk about those. What's the risk rating? And then part of that leadership team meeting was to talk about the risk and make our sponsors and leaders aware of the risks that we were facing. So again, this was a great tool. It was something that was popped up on the screen at every meeting. We focused on it, we talked about it, and then we moved forward. And the last tool that I wanted to share with you that was really important was our project closure report. So at the end of the project, we created a closure report as we wanted to not only provide a document that captured all of the work that was done project, but it was our attempt to capture business value and look ahead on any recommendations moving forward into the next project. So it included a project summary. It included who the members of the project team, who all was involved in this project. We talked about the project deliverables. So we wanted to make sure we knew here's the project deliverables that were planned and here's where the actuals that were included in this report. We talked about and made sure we captured any outstanding issues that were in this project. We talked about the transition from implementation, so the project status, implementation to actual operations. So what was the plan for that? What were any decisions that were made in that transition? And obviously we captured, the project cost. So here's what was budgeted. Here's what was actually spent. We also captured the project schedule. So just to have a history of, here's what we scheduled and here's what was the actual. So if there were any, things that we, were behind on or actually finished early on, that was captured as part of that process. And then we also included a part for the senior leadership, the sponsor, to take back with any recommendations that we had, not only for this particular project, for any future iterations of the project or the work that needed to still be done. And again, the project sponsor was very, very glad that we provided this, because it gave them kind of a little bit of a historical perspective, but a look forward to consider as they moved into to future projects. So the last part, the important part of any puzzle is, what did you learn as part of this collaboration? So this was a testing of the waters for this particular project management and manager and I. It was kind of testing the waters. But, I have to say, having said that, once we got moving and once we kind of started to work together, it felt like we had worked together longer, and really he was a true partner. The more we became comfortable with each other, I think our learning increased, which led to more collaboration success. But also, we could take that and use it on projects that we were working on in the future. So some of our key takeaways. Now, I hopefully gave you some as I was sharing some of the tools, leveraging the common tools and listening and working together. Those were all lessons learned that we were working on. But, we called this, some of our final key takeaways, or what we call the trifecta, is that we found that, in organizational change management, having a group that focuses on the people is very strategic. So organizational change management was navigating the change. They were measuring, I was measuring readiness. We were looking for people impacts. We're helping to get through the resistance. We're helping to understand what new skills people need. And we're focusing on making sure the change is communicated and transparent. In some initiatives, OCM is, they think about it, in my experience, but they really don't engage that process early on. And that's the one takeaway. Make sure that organizational change management is engaged early in the beginning of the process, because there's a lot of discussion that happens, like even the discussion of the charter, that is really something that moves through the entire project. The second part is our project manager is very important. Project managers are the executors. They're delivering the objectives, the schedules, the timelines, the status reports. That is very important, and especially a resource to that very busy, manager, director, vice president, whoever it is, that they're the ones that can help make sure that project is moving forward and not getting stalled because there's so much other, time and attention that takes away that manager, that day-to-day manager. And then the third thing is that, don't be afraid to add those other areas of expertise as needed. I talked about the business analyst, who was gathering and helping, define those data-driven priorities. But, as I said, we didn't know everything. So, we were not hesitant in reaching out and making sure that we were helping others, and engaging others on our team as needed. Some were short-term and some were, with us through the entire process. So I'm going to turn this around. I just shared this high-level snapshot of our journey, and hopefully the benefits of the collaboration that I've been experiencing in, and as I've taken these to other projects, it continues. But now I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I guess you can write your responses in the chat. So, how would this kind of partnership work for your projects? What are your key takeaways in this space? So if you want to just kind of put some ideas in the chat, that would be awesome. Any thoughts that you have? Okay, resources might be an issue, Diana. Yep, absolutely. Engage early. Okay. Sponsors need education. Absolutely, Missy. That's one thing that we're finding. Sonia, the people approach to project management. Absolutely. Time, resistance to prioritize this all. Cross-pollinating and trust. Yeah, trust was a big one. I remember our first meeting, and it was kind of like, okay, how are we going to make this work, and how do we start this? Yeah, limited resources, and we were aware of that. That's why we had to work very smart and collaborate together. Yes, a lot of companies do expect project manager to do change management with no OCM training, and that's why we were very fortunate, the hindsight of our leadership understood how important change management was, because, with many organizations, changes happen or projects happen, and yes, they're delivered on time, but, there's an adage that 70% of change initiatives fail because we don't focus on the people side of change. Some project management has bad reputation. Keeping the project moving when workload is high, absolutely, and they do tend to put off change. Respecting the plan despite the emergencies, absolutely. Inquiry engagement are fundamentals, good, engaging early. So much changing so fast, absolutely. Change, I think, is at a pace, especially with the pandemic, that's happening much quicker than past. So thank you for sharing some of those thoughts, and I continue to think about that. Want to make sure that you continue to think about that, and hopefully my goal is to just give you some thoughts and ideas as we go through this process. So let's go to Q&A now. I think we have some here in the Q&A. Okay.
Okay, yes. So the first question comes from Lisa Amston. Would one person be able to effectively work in a role as both the PM and the OCM, or are these roles too complex for one individual?
I think that as, obviously, I think project managers in the past have been in that role to do both. But the complexity of projects, the pace of change, the complexity of the organization, I think, and as change management, OD change management has evolved over time as we've gotten better in our discipline. I think it really does require both to be collaborating. That's why I think now people are realizing that, a project manager has only so much capacity. And by having this partnership where you've got that expertise in change management to come in and focus on the people side of change, you have a better outcome. You really have a better outcome to focus on business value. And that's really, I think, what's important. In some projects that I've seen in my experience in the past, when change management has not been robust, and it's been there like, oh, we're going to communicate it, but that's all we have time to do is just make sure something's communicated. And we really don't understand our end users. We don't understand impacts. We don't understand, we aren't able to manage resistance. There's more noise in that project. And so what that means is the more noise there is on a project, then that means the more effort has to be spent in tamping that noise down, especially for senior leaders, in an organization. With all the challenges we have, I say our job is to try to reduce that noise so that the project runs smoothly. So yes, I think it's beneficial to have both. And I see more and more organizations starting to recognize the value of that. I understand it's tough with COVID. I understand organizations are stressed, but if they can do that, I think they're going to see a better value, return on investment.
Another question comes from Lubosi Kikamba. Thank you, Dr. Cromwell, for a wonderful presentation. Do you see improvement science as part of change management, or something different as change impact has to be measured?
You know, as I said, I think as change management as a discipline evolves, I think we're going to be looking for you know, how these other areas start to play into that. I'm an advocate of having as many tools in our toolkit as we possibly can. So it's not that we just choose one, because not every not every initiative, not every organization is the same. So I am an advocate of really looking at, you know, all the tools we have in our toolkit, you know, things like appreciative inquiry and things like that. You know, I think it's good to have those tools because in my experience, you know, what works in one organization or one area may not work in another.
Thank you. Another question comes from Julia Macera. Hello, thank you for doing this. Looking at the PM job global goal description, sounds like it is becoming the same as talent manager, therefore always more human oriented, investing in people, stakeholders to obtain long-term results. Do you think we still need both roles in an SME company?
You know, I think, you know, my experience, it depends on the job description, because again, right now I see job descriptions for talent managers very different. Some are more focused on, you know, a very specific like recruitment, talent acquisition effort. Some are focused on performance management. You know, it really depends on the organization. I think what we're seeing a movement to is what I would consider organizational excellence, where you start to, it's really more about how do you support these projects moving from, you know, current state to future state. I see a little bit difference in the role of a talent manager, which is looking at people in the organization. And yeah, there's a connected, but I think they play a different role than what, you know, is happening in this change management or OD space.
Thank you. Another question comes from Christina Roeder. If there is time at the end, can you speak more about how you're recruited for or assigned to the project in the beginning? Thank you.
As an institution in our organization, in the area that I work in, the leadership recognized that there was significant change in the organization, in finance and business. And so one of the things that, as these change initiatives, we had multiple ERPs that were being stood up. Some changes that the organization was being asked to take on did not go as well. And so some of the work that I was doing in organizational change, in organizational development for the organization, we were getting more and more strategic in that initiative. They recognized it as a strategic approach. So that was the reason, the impetus for the office being stood up, to be able to support these different initiatives. We had a large ERP implementation coming that needed really that focus specifically on organizational change management. And so because of that, and because of that, as I said, that office being stood up within our larger division, it was a natural for us to be, you know, asked to be to work on this particular initiative, because the division was part of the larger division.
Thank you. Diana asks, do you have any tips for convincing project sponsors to include resources for OCM in their project resource plan?
So I think, you know, there are some really good resources out there. I think ProSci has some good resources out there about why project management or why change management is important today. I think what we focused on, when we were making the case for this, was really starting to look at some of the projects and where did things not go as well. I think, we were on time, scope, and budget for some of the projects. We invested money, but where was the true business value? So we had to make a case on the business value in the proposal for this, to say that, these are the reasons that we need this specific focus. I also leveraged that, as I showed you that one slide that talked about, project management is focusing on kind of the technical side of the project, and where we want to add business value is to have somebody or a group that can focus on the people side of that project. And so that was where, and I think there is still a lot of education that needs to happen, because again, a lot of times people just say change management is just, if we tell people, if we just communicate it, then we're good. We've done our change management. And when we start to educate them on all the different processes and methodology, again, it's kind of new. It's newer. It's not something that's been part of the project management language. But as you see, it's getting more and more important, and more part of that, that project management 2.0. So I think it's kind of exciting that the disciplines are really starting to merge. So I think it's just showing the value, what can happen without it and what can happen with it.
So there are two questions related to COVID. Mectis asks, thank you, Dr. Susan. It's a great presentation. As you said, we need to collaborate or work to a kind of private-public partnership. But in a time of crisis like COVID-19, there's a huge problem in adapting change. How are we going to tackle this kind of challenge?
That's a great question. These are all great questions, by the way, I have to say. I don't have an answer for that. I do know that COVID has accelerated change in many ways. In some ways, it has created a platform for change in organizations. So when you have this kind of crisis, I know in some organizations, some people that I've talked to, they were thinking about changes, but COVID kind of was a burning platform for change, for economic reasons, for business reasons, how we're doing meetings right now, that drives change. And so I think I don't have the magic bullet for that. I don't have the answer for that, but I think in some cases, COVID has allowed us to start to think about and focus on the business and business value, and that change is it kind of becomes a burning platform for change.
Thank you. One last question is from Melissa. Do you think that COVID has had some positive benefits when it comes to people embracing change and how they look at being more adaptable?
Yeah, I mean, I think the secret to that, and I don't know if there is I don't know if there's been a topic on resiliency, but we talk about resiliency, and that's a topic that we've heard a lot. But I think that what COVID has done in many cases is really given people some confidence in the fact that they are resilient. I think about organizations that went remote in like that. Their workplace had to go remote in order to keep the business running, and they succeeded. In some of the consulting firms I work with that were always on planes everywhere, going all across the country or across the world globally, they've adapted. And so thinking about resiliency as a part of change is really something that, we're focusing on to help people understand that, a key to change sometimes is resiliency. And so working on resiliency, encouraging people to look into that is important. And that could be, like I said, a whole nother webinar topic. So I think that's our last question. So thank you, Segwan, for helping with those. Just wanted to do one more slide before we get into Q&A, just to show that, I am a student. I'm always trying to learn. Here's a list of some recommended resources. Dr. Rothwell has done some great work in this space. I have some other resources that I find helpful to me. This is not, the only list. There's many, many more resources that are out there, but these are some of the ones that I've used. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Jenny, and I want to thank everyone for your time today.
I'd like to thank Dr. Cromwell for sharing knowledge, expertise, and wisdom with us today. If we did not get to your questions, please feel free to send us an email, or you can reach out to her directly via email. On behalf of our OD&C and Workforce Ed program, we hope you found this webinar helpful. We would like to hear your feedback on our webinar series. Please take the survey using the link in the chat box. If you cannot get the link, we will send it to you via email. Our next webinar is about evaluation planning for real organizational change by Dr. Maureen Johns on March 26th, Friday at the same time today. Registrations for all events can be found on all of our social media platforms. Thank you all for attending today, and see you in the next webinar. Thank you, Sue.